Hey, I'm Steve Hines with ThreatAdvice and thrilled to be here today with Frank Abagnale, who you have probably learned of his early part of his life through the movie Catch Me If You Can. And it's such an honor to have you here today, Frank, and to be a spokesman for ThreatAdvice and your belief in what we're doing. And so we're just glad you came to town today and spend a few minutes with us to kind of let people get to know you better. And so thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Steve. It's been a pleasure.
Good. Thank you so much. Well, I'd love to just ask you a few questions that I've kind of thought through, but we'll see where the interview goes as we go, kind of free flowing. But one, of course, I've seen the movie, and even of interest to me before the movie is kind of your early years, where you grew up, what your early childhood was like, and just some information about that part of your life.
Yeah, I actually grew up just north of New York City in Westchester County in a little town called Bronxville. I was actually one of 4 children in the family, the so-called middle child of the 4. I was educated by the Christian Brothers of Ireland in a private Catholic school called Iona in New Rochelle, New York, where I went to school from kindergarten to high school. When I reached 16 years old in the 10th grade, my parents, after 22 years of marriage, one day decided to get a divorce. Unlike most divorces where the children are usually the first to know, my parents were very good about keeping it a secret. I remember being in the 10th grade when the father walked in the classroom, asked the brother to excuse me from class. When I came out in the hallway, the father handed me my books and told me that one of the brothers would drive me to the county seat where I would meet my parents and they would explain what was going on. The brother dropped me over the steps of a stone building. It said family court. I was a little young, didn't really know exactly what that meant. When I got to the lobby, my parents were not there, but I was ushered into the back of a men's courtroom where my parents were staying before a judge. I really couldn't hear what the judge was saying or my parents' response, but eventually the judge saw me there and he motioned me to approach the bench. And he told me that my parents were getting a divorce and he needed to know which parent I chose to live with. I started to cry, so I turned and ran out of the courtroom. The judge called for a 10-minute recess, but by the time my parents got outside, I was gone. In real life, my mother never saw me again until I was in my 20s, and my father actually never saw me again ever. He died while I was in prison in France in an accident. So he actually, unlike the movie that had me going back and forth, that didn't actually occur.
So from the day you ran out of court, you never saw your father again?
No. And I ended up on the streets of New York City. My father actually owned a stationery store in Manhattan on the corner of 40th and Madison. We all had to work in the store in the summer, so I made deliveries for my dad on a bike. I knew the city very well. I was comfortable in the city. So I went to New York City, which was just a 30-minute train ride. But I soon realized I had to find a way to support myself. I did have a little money in a checking account that my dad had set up for me from working. So I started writing checks, and I found it very easy to go in and ask somebody to cash a check for me, and they did. You know, they were $15, $20. But it then started to get more difficult. They'd start to ask me, you don't have a bank account here, we can't cash your check for you. So I one day was walking down the street on Fifth Avenue, and I saw an airline crew come out of a hotel, and I thought to myself, boy, if I could get this uniform and I could become a pilot, then I'd walk in the bank as a pilot. That would give me such credibility. And so I finagled the uniform. I basically changed my date of birth on my driver's license. At 16, we had a driver's license. Back then, they didn't have photos on it, just an IBM card. So I was actually born in 1948. I dropped the 4, converted it to a 3. That made me 10 years older. And I started going into the bank as the pilot and said, hey, I'm on a layover here. I ran a little short on cash. Could I cash a check? Never had a problem, and I quickly realized the power of that uniform. They weren't paying attention to me or the check. All they saw was the uniform, and I realized the power of that uniform. You know, everything I did in that early career was because I was an adolescent. I had no fear of being caught. I had no fear of consequences. I didn't sit out in front of the bank with a $500 check and say, here's my plan. I'm going to go in the bank, cash this check. If they say this, I'll do this. If they do this, I'll do that. I just went in and did it. I always believe to this day that had I been a little older, 22, 25, I would have never done half the things I did because I would have rationalized it'll never work, you can't get away with it. But because I was so young, it gave me the confidence to do a lot of the things I did. But even so, everything led to something else. Then I realized I could fly on the planes for free, I could stay in the hotels for free. So everything I took on a personation of a pilot, a doctor, a lawyer, there was a reason behind it. It was not the desire to be a pilot, a doctor, a lawyer, but the reason of a means to get to whatever end I was getting to.
Right. So after you decided, okay, I've got to quit being a pilot because this is catching up to me, and having read the book, I know eventually, it was, your luck would run out.
Right.
What made you decide, okay, it's time to do something different, and what did you do next?
And it wasn't so much that. I had a lot of money, but I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, into a singles complex called the Riverbend Apartments. And on the application for the lease, one of the questions was occupation. So I didn't want to write airline pilot because the next question said employed by, supervisor's name, phone number. So I just wrote doctor. But I had a very inquisitive apartment manager, so she said to me, oh, I see here a doctor. What kind of doctor are you? So I just said, oh, I'm a medical doctor, but I'm not practicing medicine right now. I left my practice out west to come invest in some real estate I have. Oh, how interesting. Well, what type of medical doctor are you? And then I figured being a singles complex, pediatrician would be pretty safe. So I said I was a pediatrician. Then I moved in. Everybody thought I was a pediatrician, but I wasn't practicing. But then I met a real pediatrician. So I started reading up just to keep up conversation with him. Then he invited me up to the hospital where he worked. I met nurses and other doctors there. And the next thing you know, he comes to me and says that one of the doctors had a death in his family and they need somebody to come up for a couple of weeks and supervise a shift. It's just an administrative duty, not operating or treating anybody. And could I cover the shift? First, I tried to get out of it by saying, well, no, I can't do that. I'm not licensed to practice medicine in the state of Georgia, only in California where I have my practice. Oh, is this an administrative capacity? They just issue a temporary certificate. You don't need to do that. So I thought to myself, well, let me see if I can get away with this. So I ended up being the doctor. I was always smart enough to know that whatever I did, you could only do it for a period of time, that sooner or later they'd catch you. So you had to shift gears and change to something else, or eventually people would get caught on.
Mm-hmm. And one thing, having read the book, that struck me, that was I know you used your personality, your charm as a means to get people to maybe overlook some things they might normally look at, and in a way that was what we think of today as social engineering. That was an early form of social engineering.
Absolutely, and that's why there are many writers who refer to me as the father of social engineering.
Really?
Because literally never realizing that's what it was, but here I was 16, I said, how do I get a pilot's uniform? So I basically placed a phone call to Pan Am's executive headquarters. The switchboard answered. I said, I'd like to speak to somebody in purchasing. Clerk came on. I said to the clerk, hi, my name's so-and-so, I'm a co-pilot with the company. I'm based out of San Francisco. I have a problem. What's the problem? Well, we flew a trip in here yesterday. I sent my uniform out through the hotel to have it dry cleaned. Now the hotel and the cleaner said I can't find it. I have a flight in about 6 hours. I need to get a uniform. Well, you have to pay for the price of a uniform. No, I know. I'll be happy to pay, but I didn't know what to do. Well, you go down to the Well-Built Uniform Company on Fifth Avenue. They're our supplier. I'll call them and tell them you're coming, and they'll take care. And that's exactly what I did. And so again, never realizing it was social engineering, but I realized the more I did it, the more I realized you can get a lot of information from people just by talking to them on the phone. And keep in mind, this is way before computers and the internet and the things you can do today, which make social engineering so much easier than when I did it.
And just how you make people think about you. Having a pilot uniform makes them think different about you, being engaging, and having a certain persona and personality with, say, the bank tellers who are cashing your checks. That's what struck me. You could have easily been caught, but a lot of what you did was covered up because of your early form of social engineering.
Yeah, and when I think about it today, back then to change your identity, you basically altered your driver's license, you had to make up some phony identification. Today it is so much simpler to do because of the internet and all that. You can change into many hundreds of different identities. So it was a lot more work involved in doing it back then. So it always amazes me that you would think what I did 50 years ago would be more difficult today, when actually it's 4,000 times easier today than when I did it.
And that's interesting you say. Expound and expand on that a little bit. So what you just said was what you did back then, which you had a successful run of committing crime after crime after crime. And you said to do that today is a lot easier. What do you mean?
Let's take a perfect example. When I started actually really printing checks, I needed a Heidelberg printing press. It was $1 million press back then. It was 60 feet long. It was 18 feet high. It required 3 operators. So I spent 8 months learning how to operate this press. There were color separations, there were negatives, there were plates, there were typesetting, there were chemicals to make plates. Today, basically, you sit down at a laptop, you open it up, and you ask for a diagram of a check, and a very sophisticated blank check comes up on your screen. Then you look out the window and you see Delta Airlines logo, so you go and basically go to their website, capture their corporate logo, put it up in the left-hand corner of the check. You put a nice background in it. Maybe you take a jet taking off in the background of a Delta tail and you put it in the background. You do a step and repeat, Delta, Delta, Delta. And in 15 minutes, you created a beautiful 4-color check on your screen. And because we live in a too much information world today, all I have to do is call my victim. So I call Delta Airlines, get the switchboard, say, yeah, I'd like to speak to someone in accounts receivables. Clerk comes on. Hey, I was getting ready to pay a bill, but we would refer to wire you this money. I need wiring instructions. Oh yeah, we bank at SunTrust Bank in Atlanta, account number 176853. Any bank, any company you call today and tell them you're wiring the money, they have to tell you all the instructions that you would put on a check, routing number, account number, bank name. You go to the bank's logo on the website, capture their logo, put SunTrust on there, put in the MICA line, and then you call back to Delta, ask to speak to someone in corporate communications. They come on the phone, you say, hey, I was getting interested in investing and I would like to get a copy of your annual report. They mail it to you. Page 3 is the signature of the chairman of the board, the CEO, the CFO, the treasurer, the controller. White glossy paper, black ink, camera-ready art. You scan it, you digitize, you put it on the check. So it's just amazing how technology has made these things so simple that then were a lot of work and a lot of pre-work to learn how to do it.
That is so interesting. So would you say today there are a lot more ways for scam artists, for crooks, for cyber crooks to accomplish their goal of theft than there were
Absolutely.
earlier?
And again, keep in mind, as we just in that scenario, social engineering was still part of it. You're calling someone and they're giving you information. So it's still part of that scam today. That will never go away. You know, I've been an ambassador to AARP for 5 years. I basically write all of the texts, all the videos and stuff that go into their Fraud Watch network, which goes out to their 38 million members who are 50 and older, and basically teaching them how not to be scammed. And there are so many scams out there, the grandparent scam, the email scams, the Microsoft scams. And so basically it comes down to educating these folks about these scams. But the one thing that all scams have in common, and as I explain to them all the time, at some point, I have to ask you for money or I have to ask you for information. So no matter how long our phone call goes on, so for example, maybe a 75-year-old woman lost her husband, she meets somebody online, they have a great relationship, it goes on for 6 months, they talk, they visit, they speak on the phone, and everything's great, and then one day she says, hey, you know you only live 2 states away, how come you don't come to see me? Well, I have to have this operation, and it's $35,000 and I don't have it, and if I don't have the operation, I might not even be around much longer. Well, you know, I could loan you the $35,000. That's the red flag. The minute it comes up that money's involved, or I'm asking you what's your social security number, where do you bank, what's your account number, those are the red flags, and they will always have to come into play to make any scam work.
Right. Going back to your personal life, so you had the pilot scam. What did you do when that ran out?
I did the doctor, was the next thing I did.
After the doctor, and then
at the hospital, I actually met a candy striper, a little different than the movie, that was there, and basically asked, her father was the Attorney General in Louisiana, and back then pilots would go on furlough, so they wouldn't work for 3 or 4 months, but most of them all had lawyer backgrounds, CPA, they were entrepreneurs, because they only work 80 hours a month when you fly. So basically, they did a lot of other things. So it was very common to say, no, I fly for Delta, but I've been furloughed for 6 months, so I'm doing this till my furlough's over, or they call me back. So I had said to her, I went to law school, but I didn't practice law because I went to fly planes, and I'm on a furlough. Oh, you know, my dad's looking for attorneys. You should come to Louisiana and meet him. So I went down and met her dad. He said, absolutely, I'd love to have you on the staff. Of course, you have to take the bar. And basically, I took the bar not one time and just did it, but I took it several times. But each time I memorized a lot of what I was taking or got wrong, and finally passed the bar and then practiced law. Again, you meet people in these relationships, other lawyers and other people, that when you live a con life, you're living a chameleon life, and basically people eventually, you have to be nice to everybody. Because the minute you get somebody who doesn't like you, maybe they're jealous of you, or they find something, a flaw in your personality, then they start looking for the negative in you. Mm-hmm. So that's when you start to get, so you went to Harvard, right? Yeah, so you remember Professor so-and-so? And you have to learn that usually the first 2 or 3 are real people, and then the third person's a phony. So you would always go, oh yeah, I had him. I remember him. And then you have to be very keen to the fact, but sooner or later someone's going to say, there is nobody by that name, or I'm real suspicious of this guy. So I think even as a kid, I was smart enough to say, it's time to move on. Mm-hmm. You can't keep carrying this on for the rest of your life. Yeah.
Yes, right. Well, what caused you to decide, I don't want to live this life anymore. I want to turn over a new leaf, so to speak. And you've been working for the FBI for 43 years now, trying to help them catch people that do things like you used to do. What made you make that turn?
Well, I'll be honest with you, and if I didn't tell you this, I'd be conning you or lying to you. People love me to say, well, you were in prison, religion turned your life around, you found God, you were born again, you decided that prison rehabilitated you and now you're a good person. None of that happened. Being the opportunist I was, the FBI came to me, gave me an opportunity to get out of prison. I just saw that as, well, this is a way to get out of prison. I'd much rather be out of prison. So I took it, never dreaming about, I'm going straight, I'll never do this again, I'll never break the law again. But what happened was 2 things. First of all, I met my wife on an undercover assignment. I fell in love with her.
Women will change you every time.
Yes, she knew me as somebody else. She knew me as a totally different person. I met her family as a totally different person. I used to never get involved with people when I did undercover work. And one day I had to leave that assignment I was on, and so I broke protocol to tell her who I really was and how much I cared about her. She married me against the wishes of her parents, been married for 43 years. She gave me 3 wonderful sons. But being married had changed my life. She changed my life. She trusted me, she believed in me, she had faith in me. I didn't have a dime to my name. I was a ward of the government. And basically, she turned my life around. And then, when you bring a child into the world, fatherhood changes your life completely.
Yes.
And then you realize the tremendous responsibility you have for another human being. All of that was a big part of changing my life. And then when you surround yourself by 12,000 FBI agents who are truly the most ethical people, have tremendous character, love of country, love of family, you surround yourself by those people. And that was tough because I had a real tunnel vision. They didn't like me there. They didn't trust me. I had to build all of that credibility over years. But you surround yourself with such incredible people that starts to wear off on you. Then you start their character, their ethics, their right and wrong. So I think the combination of both of those things are what really changed my life.